Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to speak to motion 504, public-private partnerships. I'm going to open by saying that we are not anti-private sector. I am not anti-private sector. I spent 12 years of my career attracting investment into this province. Now, I have also heard from many in my constituents in Calgary Foothills about the lack of school infrastructure in our rapidly growing area of Calgary. So many of our residents purchased their homes in the hopes that schools would be built in the empty fields next to them. We need to be focused on rolling up our sleeves and building these schools. We can't spend any more time in negotiating public-private partnerships. I would query about the schools that have been built. Have they been delivered faster through P3? Because what we need to be concerned about is not just the cost of construction, but how quickly are we putting a shovel in the ground and building these schools. We can't waste more time in delaying these projects. Mr. Speaker, we know that the P3 model has been in use around the world. We know that Europe went down the P3 path long ago. And we know that they're facing some challenges that they've had in some of those P3 projects. We know that some of those countries are moving back and dialing back on pursuing P3 and back to a model of public construction. We absolutely respect the private sector, the need to encourage the private sector in having policies in place for the private sector to flourish. But I think we also need to separate social infrastructure that our society so critically needs: education, schools, health, hospitals, and focus on the fact that it is the government's responsibility to deliver on these critical pieces of infrastructure. We've learned from Europe that P3 projects don't always deliver on value for money. I think we can all agree that the private sector is motivated by one goal, and one goal only: to deliver profit. They are not in the business of delivering social good. We do need to respect the goal that the private sector is trying to achieve. We need the private sector to flourish and create jobs in our economy. But we need to separate the social goals that we're trying to achieve and the demands on the government to meet those social goals. Profit objectives won't be met through reducing costs. The only way for profit objectives to be met is by reducing costs. To deliver a project with lower costs potentially means cutting corners. I might ask, this is not a P3 question, but what happened when we privatized laboratory services in Calgary? Did we save money? Did we achieve better outcomes for Calgarians in making that partnership with the private sector? Often the private sector is unable to deliver on the timelines and the costs promised in their negotiated agreements. They often come back to the government stating that they can't meet what they initially signed up to, that they need more time, that they will need more funds. While the Minister of Infrastructure suggests that risks are shared with the private sector and the government in a P3 model, often, if that model goes off the rails, it's the government that is ultimately responsible on delivering and holding that risk. Again, we should be clear on what our objectives are. That in this case, we're talking about delivering on social infrastructure, and that the private sector is not in business to deliver on social infrastructure. We should have policies in place to encourage businesses to flourish. But we need to be clear that public infrastructure is the responsibility of government. We are well behind on delivering education and health infrastructure in this province. We do need to roll up our sleeves in delivering those critical infrastructure projects. Let's focus on doing that rather than negotiating P3 partnerships. Let's focus on what the government's role is in delivering those projects. I support that we should be moving to ban public-private partnerships. I support that we should be, again, rolling up our sleeves. A government should always be looking for the cost effectiveness and how they approach a project. But that doesn't mean that we need to look to partner with the private sector in delivering on social infrastructure. We know that the past Conservative governments in this province have tried P3s before and they didn't work, and they backed off of that and moved back to a public delivery model. We've even had former ministers in this government talk about how P3s did not work for schools. Why do we insist on pursuing a model that we know in the past has not necessarily delivered the outcomes that we're looking for? I encourage the members in this House to support 504, that we should be focused on delivering the social infrastructure so needed in this province. The government should take responsibility for that, and we shouldn't be spending our time negotiating with the private sector to achieve social outcomes that they are not designed to deliver. Thank you.
The Honourable